coming in 4 years.
All right. Now there are a couple more who said that they wanted to come on Google Meet. So I've got the Google Meet set up.
And the author would have tuned in by Zoom, but he said he was traveling today. But he said he's answered my questions about this on the Facebook groups, so he's very willing to communicate.
I know there were 2 people from the IT class that are coming.
Oh, okay.
Bonnie and
Yes,
Bonnie and Cindy.
they could not make it in person, but they said that they could. They might come on Google Meet. They would like to come on Google Meet.
Okay.
So hopefully we can see that.
So how long did it take you to read it, Leela?
It took me about well, I didn't read it like in one sitting, but it took me like maybe a couple hours. How long did it take y'all?
I don't know. I did it in one day.
I don't remember how long it took me, but one thing I do remember about it, I didn't want it to end. And I thought that was a very good sign. Whether it was a combination of the material, how it was written, it was suspenseful, so I thought that was a good.
Depressing.
Sad.
Yeah, that was kind of. I was a little. It felt like it's this sad story that these children disappeared. Probably died. I think we can infer probably died, and we don't know what happened, and their family never got that closure of knowing what happened. Especially the older brother, who felt so guilty.
He was so remorseful.
And he was just a kid himself. It was just kind of a heartbreaking event.
And so unexpected. Who would have thought?
It had to be somebody they knew, because 3 children those ages.
What was it, 4?
Boys especially, they're going to fight back.
Was it age 4? What was it? 4, 5?
4, 6, and 8.
Okay, 4, 6, and 8. I think Gordon was 11, the one that stated.
He was 9. That surprised me.
Oh, he was 9.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess they were all very close in age, and then after the 3 disappeared, then the parents had more children. But
She was pregnant at the time, and then had a couple more.
And in 1951, you didn't think about letting them walk to the park.
mm-hmm.
You didn't think anything of it. One thing that they brought out in the book that I thought was significant was the cutting through yards. That may have been a factor, because I remember I grew up in South Minneapolis, and I would cut through yards. My friends and I would cut through yards, and we didn't think anything of it. You don't really think about that, right? You're just cutting through the yard. You're not there very long. But one time, a family, they got mad. They were next door, and they had me in their kitchen yelling at me, saying they were going to call the police just to scare me. So, to homeowners, that could be a very, very big deal, They could view it as trespassing. So, does anyone else have anything to share about cutting through yards when you were a kid to go somewhere? Anyone else did that? Raise your hand if you did. Nobody cut through neighbors' yards?
Oh, yeah, I did.
You
It's
did?
always a shortcut.
Yeah, a shortcut, right. Did you ever have a problem with it? An issue?
Well, I live in the city, so we didn't have that kind of,
Oh, okay.
but moving here, living on Herd Island, there was no boundary. Nobody had, fence. We just went through everybody's yard. And of course, there were hardly any children, so the adults did it.
Well, another old guy, he had, because Minneapolis, so we had snow in the winter, and he had his plants covered over to keep them from freezing.
Yeah.
And he said, this was another guy, another person who got mad at me. And he said, if you lost your coat, you would die. And if my plants lost their covering, they could die. So, but again, my thought was, I had never thought of it. I didn't mean to knock it off, And then the other people were just mad because they had caught me cutting through their yard. So. How about you, Leila? Did you cut through people's yards?
I'm sure that I did at some point, but one thing that I thought was interesting was like how sharp a difference of time period there was, because by the time I was a kid, there was no way that my parents would have let me, go off by myself or with other kids. It would have been unthinkable. And so, like reading this, I was like, they let a kid as young as 4 go off with just, no adults. And I kind of had to put myself in like the time and the culture, and that it was normal.
Yeah.
I'm sure my parents cut through yards, and I, went to the park, the store, their friends' houses when they were in elementary school. But then by the time I was a kid, it was like, no, I might have been kidnapped, or which is interesting. It's interesting that stranger violence against children is so exceptionally rare that a lot of people do believe like we've gone too far in that other direction. But it is interesting that in 1951, not only was it totally normal for kids to go off by themselves, but when they disappeared, like kidnapping didn't even occur to anyone as a motive. That's
right. And they didn't even, they were together. I mean, usually the 4 and this time the 3, and you'd think, well, 3. So that again adds kind of an element of extraordinary to it. But yeah, I went anywhere I want. I was out playing till 9 p.m. The whole neighborhood was, but I did have that experience where those people were mad at me. And it's like, it was just not something that would have occurred to me. But anyway, with this situation, my theory is that they had typically cut through that neighbor's yard, the main suspect, Lloyd Paddock, and this time, and he didn't like it. I don't know if he ever said anything or just was building up inside of him, but then he sees just the 3 of them without the older brother and took advantage of the situation and did something to them. That's the best theory that, for me, that fits the situation, because there was those other allegations against him.
Yeah, like that. It definitely seemed like going through the list of like, well, this could have happened, or it could have been this person. It was all like, well, to me, it was like, yeah, it could have been. Like that neighbor that you mentioned, well, he repaved his basement, so could he have buried bodies there? We don't know. There were some other people who were mentioned as like, maybe they were hanging around, maybe somebody saw somebody with some kids that it could have been, and it's just, and and the other thing is that in 1951 they didn't have the kind of forensics, like to test for DNA and stuff that we do now, so it was just kind of one of those inexplicable, or not inexplicable, but no. Like, we may never know.
no physical evidence, like you were saying, the cap that got lost within the family was the only piece of forensic evidence. And granted, they didn't have that testing then, but I've been watching, listening to the podcasts on Bloodline Detectives with Nancy Grace, and they have literally kept evidence for decades, in some cases, in a refrigerator, and then eventually found this, proved that it was a suspect. In some cases, he had already died. But, and that could be true in this case, if they hadn't lost the cap. So, but usually in cases like this, because I listen to a lot of true crime, some cases, usually like there's somebody that says something or whatever, and that is true in this case, like against this man, Lloyd Paddock. And again, but that was lost in a way, but not really. So the lady moved to Scottsdale, Arizona in 1967 or something, and she made a report to a psychiatrist there that Lloyd Paddock had molested her daughter. So that's another arrow pointing towards him. And then the basement, and they also replaced the wood in his truck. I don't know how that would fit into the crime, though, replacing the wood paneling in his truck. Because if he, kidnapped them and killed them, where does the truck come in? I don't know. But the pouring of the cement, that would come into it. So to me, and he was a single truck driver, so he, there was nobody there watching him. Plus the comment he made to the neighbor, does anyone remember that? When they were looking for the boys, this woman said to him, "Aren't you going to help look for the boys?" And he said, "They're not worth it," or something like that. So that's another thing. But he should have, if he would go to all that trouble to do that, why didn't he just build a nice fence with a gate, with a locked gate? And but that's my thought on it.
Well, I mean, if he was the murderer, obviously we don't know. I mean, it would seem like you don't kill 3 children because they walk across your yard.
No, you're taking it like if he was a molester.
Right.
Taking advantage.
So it would be like he wouldn't have put up a fence. Like I don't necessarily want to say well, he's the murderer. Cause obviously we don't know. But hypothetically, if you were a serial killer, you would want to leave your yard open and victims could come in. So
Well, it seems to me, I'm just putting everything together. It's like, to me, the main thing was they didn't want them in their yard. He was angry. Yet they had done it before. Gordon may have even cut through his yard that same day, 20 minutes later, and they were already inside. Who knows? So to me, my theory is that he was angry about that, seeking revenge, plus he had that disposition to be a molester, or maybe he just killed them. He was a bad character, so. So I grew up in South Minneapolis. Now this person, Lloyd Paddock, he died in 1975, I think it's funny because we would go up to North Minneapolis to do canvassing, for our religion. So it's possible that I could have even, actually been somewhere or met him. I mean, that's just the crazy part about it, that it's a small world.
yeah, I mean, it is interesting. That you mentioned canvassing, as a kid, because that's another thing that is kind of has shifted because even when I was a kid, we would go door to door, sell Girl Scout cookies or raise, sell things for band or, kids would go door to door.
Knock on strangers' doors.
And then, and it's and now that's, way more perceived as whether it's actually dangerous or not, the cultural norms around it have certainly shifted.
Right. For instance, with that religion, they basically don't go door to door anymore. They do another way, which was standing on the street or having some, and waiting for people to approach them. So, which is probably, a better way to do it, because homeowners these days are more fearful, or they don't like a door being knocked on. And so either way, we look at it, times have changed, things have changed. And then the other theory, does anyone think that they went into the river, the Mississippi River? That's a big river. I remember I grew up near the Mississippi River. But
Well, there again, free, they wouldn't, free drown, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, and it seemed like, and the point that Jack LaHaye made also is like if they had drowned, like it would be suspicious if it was all three, and then also then where are the bodies? Because if they had died of natural causes, then like there would be bodies.
well, they did drain the river.
Mm-hmm.
They went to great lengths.
So yeah, so like the absence of a body anywhere near where they were may point towards kidnapped, possibly murdered. One aspect of the the kidnapped possibility that I kind of dinged against was there were a couple of older men who believed that they were the lost children because they had some type of memory of being separated from their families as young children. And I know that there's been other cases like that where either kidnapped victims have been found decades later,
Yeah, there has.
or people who were kidnapped as young children have some kind of memory, even if an unclear one, of being taken or of their families. And sometimes like this, sometimes it turns out not to be true, like that it's not that person, but they, something could have happened to them. So I guess that was kind of also that was kind of also another heartbreaking element. Not only the family who doesn't know what happened to their children has this moment of hope that somebody who thinks he might be their son has come back, and then to find out that it's not true. But then also from that man's point of view, that he doesn't know what happened to him, he thinks maybe he's found his real family, and then that turns out not to be true.
And like the mother said, as time went by, she says, I just hope they're alive and somebody raised them and they're doing okay. I mean, just the things that she went through, and such a person of faith. I think that's the part that, is so hard, is that, and the father too, such strong believers, and not getting their answer in their lifetime. But the other thing about going into the river, which I think is to say that they must have gone in the river, or the authorities at that time, and it's like Gordon said, they did not typically go to the river. That's not something they would have done. I mean, he was like 20 minutes behind them, meet at the big old oak tree. And when I was on the group, it was like North Minneapolis memory, I joined that, and this lady said, I remember seeing the boys at the park, generally, and she's somebody in her 70s now. And I said, do you remember seeing them there that day? And she said, no. So, I mean, she had a strong memory of the time period, because obviously people were searching and everything. So I thought that was pretty significant. But the going into the river, and it was frozen, right? I mean, didn't this happen in November or something? They were all dressed up. Yeah. So I mean, the river back then, I mean, it would freeze in most places. Maybe not solid the whole way through, but so that again, what are the chances that if they did go into the river or on the river, they would have been found. But, and the other thing, is like you said, the kidnapping wasn't that common, it wasn't a thought. And that, I guess, led to the, case not being solved. I mean, they did canvass the neighborhood. They did go door to door. But did anyone else listen to the podcast? There was a 6-part, I think you said your mother listened to it.
Yeah, she listened to the podcast, and the way she described it, I didn't listen to it. The way she described it, it was a lot of the same information that was in the book.
But it didn't include the suspect, Lloyd Paddock, the most, yeah. So since the publishing of the book, where that left was that at that time, they were not allowed to approach the house. You would have to have the current homeowner of Lloyd Paddock's house. You would have to have some kind of authority to do that. However, since the publication of the book, they have approached the current owner of the home, the homeowner, 3 times. And they have each politely declined. Now, I was talking to Sam, who used to work here, about it because we discussed the book, and she said, boy, I'd want to know for sure either way. And I said, yeah, I would too. But then Tosh brought out another viewpoint as a homeowner, which you probably are, and you said, well, I wouldn't want to know. It would bring down the value of the house. Didn't you say that?
No, but
If they were,
but we were talking about that. Though.
Yeah. So say they did go in, they did find evidence that were bodies there, and of course they have to put it back just the way it was, whether they find something or not. It has to be, looking good. But to even know that, then it would be known as murder house, where crime happened. Does that bring down the value of the home? Anybody know?
It certainly can't. Sometimes it can make the value increase because there are a lot of very morbid people who would be like, "Oh, it's haunted. That's cool." But that is true. But in general, yeah, it can bring down the value of the house. And in some states, I don't know about Minnesota, but in some states, a realtor is required to notify prospective buyers if there was a crime in the house.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Because they might just not want to buy it. So it might be, in other words, it could make it harder to sell.
It could make it
because
harder to sell.
some people wouldn't be interested.
I wasn't even thinking economically. I was just thinking like psychologically.
Mm-hmm.
If there might be murder bodies in your basement, do you want to know? Because like if you don't investigate, then you don't know. And maybe you can just be like, I don't know. So, but then if then if you investigate, then you know. So I can kind of see that like I can kind of see more the I don't want to know perspective.
I mean, I know I would want to know, but when Tosh said that to me, I realized there's another perspective, and that is economic. I mean, it's one thing to say I would want to know, and it's another thing to actually own the home. And I don't know what the time frame is, but they obviously bought it not knowing about that. So, what do you think? Any thoughts? If you were the homeowner, would you want to know?
Yeah, I do have homeowners.
I would definitely want to know. But on the other hand, you might get a good buy.
Yeah.
Get a what?
A good buy.
Reduce. Yeah.
But if you already owned it, would you be concerned about the value of the home going down?
I would be.
Yeah. Can you imagine what you would say if you were in that situation?
Say what?
Can you imagine what your reaction might be if you were the homeowner and you
If I bought it and then found out,
yeah,
I'd be angry.
Well, of course, yes.
that you didn't know?
Yeah.
What do you think you might do? Would you allow that?
I
Test?
don't know.
You'd have to
Too
be,
far-fetched.
so So the future of that particular house or that situation would be, I wonder if those homeowners sold it now, if they would be required to divulge. That's what I'm wondering now.
Well, I think legally it's like if a crime happened, like if a crime was known to have happened.
Mhm.
And since this is all purely speculative, like,
Yeah.
well, maybe this
So
person
they
is a
wouldn't,
murderer and
okay.
so on, then I don't think that would be. I was thinking I would want to know, just because if I were living there, I would want to know. Like as soon as the possibility was raised, like now I'm going to be thinking about it. Now I'm going to be thinking about my house. Like, I don't know, could years back, had somebody been murdered there? Now it's going to bug me. And because that could be anywhere. We don't know. But yeah, I would want to know. But at the same time, it also sounds like it also sounds like kind of a reach to think, oh, this man, he was angry at the boys. He remodeled his basement. Therefore he
He
killed
made a
them.
snide remark.
Yeah.
Just don't forget the allegations of molestation.
Yeah, that's a little more, but like, it still seems kind of like like, I don't know, obviously he's died, I don't know if I don't think like a grand jury would think that was really sufficient evidence to be like, oh, well,
Right.
Clearly
It's
he
not
murdered
enough.
them, and,
Yeah.
but it is, I mean, it's certainly a possible,
So it seems like the only way forward on this particular situation, since they don't have definitive evidence, or maybe a grand jury wouldn't approve it, is if they sold it to someone who then would allow it. Again, that's kind of iffy. People are really going through a lot with housing these days, with high housing prices and very difficult times. Is that if somebody had enough money, who would buy that house from them? Like, what's your price, or something like that? Then it seems like that's the only possibility, because there's no legal way forward. Or if they found the cap and they got some evidence from that. That was kind of confusing to me, because if you touch a cap, what is on there? Maybe something is on there. But going back to the cap, though, here's the part that was interesting to me. The cap didn't appear on the Mississippi River until a couple days later, after the boys disappeared. Then they found it. So what does that tell me? The person who was done with their basement and all that, then they took it and threw it out there. He wouldn't have had time to do it before that. He had to cover up his crime. So that's the timing of that was interesting to me. They didn't find it immediately. Now, if somebody could have seen him throwing it out there, that would mean something else too. But apparently, nobody did. So.
Yeah, and I mean, do we even know for sure that it was the same caps?
I think the father identified. Was it one cap or two?
It was two.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, the parents did identify it, but I don't know. It seems like, and I like, not that I think that the parents would lie, but it seems like it would be so easy to convince yourself that there's a clue. And it did seem like, and I felt so bad for the parents and the siblings, because it seemed like they were so desperate to believe and to cling to that hope that there's a clue, that there's evidence, that they're going to find out. I guess it just psychologically, it seemed like maybe they were latching on to anything just to have that hope of an answer.
I have a friend from high school, and she moved to Monticello, that small town where the family moved to. I don't know if they moved there like 6 months after the boys went missing or something, and that's also right on the Mississippi. And she was going to read that book. And I asked her to join in. I don't know if she did. Did anyone join in on the Zoom?
No. I know, like we said, a couple people said they were going to, but they didn't make it. So, but it is open, and we are, filming on the Facebook page, so people can watch it later if they choose to. Yeah, I was a little bit, even thinking, thinking today about doing the book club. I was kind of like, I'm just a little curious, almost like how much there is to talk about, just in terms of we don't know what happened.
Right. I mean, it's a very simple story, but to me, it involves other issues like the cutting through the yards. That was something that I could definitely. And the other thing about it is this, the mystery of it combined with the sinisterness of the possibility. And I have to consider that possibility because those boys were never seen. So to me, a human mind had to be involved with, no evidence, no boys, no nothing. So I guess that was part of the reason that it captivated me. And it could happen today, but nobody was suspecting it back then. So that when there's no suspect, it's like when no one would think of that, I think it makes it easier for somebody to try something like that, to get away with it. But another book or story, if anybody likes true crime, it's not exactly similar. It's very different, but kind of similar. It's called the Lindbergh Kidnapping Hoax. Well, it's about the Lindbergh Kidnapping Hoax, but it's called The Crime of the Century, the Lindbergh Kidnapping Hoax. And two lawyers took a look at that, where the Charles Lindbergh, the aviator who flew across the Atlantic in 1928, I think it was, and then they bought a house out somewhere. It was more remote, and it was very remote. And then his son was kidnapped and later found. But anyway, so those two lawyers took a fresh look at that case, and they said that was a result of a practical joke gone awry by Lindbergh himself. Has anyone else read that book? It's pretty fascinating. But again, it goes back to that whole thought of we won't consider this, we never thought of that, whatever. And that's where, the criminal is counting on, on that. But yeah, if we had more people attend, I'm sure we could have gotten more and varied responses or remarks or whatever. So yeah, not much to it. But I guess for me, I just enjoyed reading it. That was my thought. Did anyone else enjoy reading it? Raise your hand.
Yeah, I enjoyed reading it. The other thing that I thought was a little bit interesting was, one of the witnesses was a woman who said, the landlady who said that she suspected one of her tenants, because it was an older man living with a teenager, and she thought the older man, was sexually abusing him, and that made her suspicious that he was, violent in that kind of way, but she never said anything, and it just kind of made me think about
she was afraid of him.
She was afraid of him, and it just kind of made me think about that type of crime being so covered up and not remarked on. So yeah, I mean, a lot of violence against children was underground, not talked about, not usually escalating to murder, but still violence against children.
And the other thing I liked about the book was just the flavor, just giving the flavor of the times, imagining it. It's like it was a simpler time. And I actually lived for a while on, they lived on Colfax, I think, and then there was, or Bryant, Aldrich. I actually lived on that street, but in South Minneapolis, so that was interesting. Like if I had walked north or driven north, I actually would have been, at that house. But the other thing I liked about it was the people that, the guy that wrote it, the people that investigated how they did every single thing they possibly could. Like they went and they got a DNA sample from the parents and they put it in the database. And the other aspect of it is like there's always people that call in and say things, or, we have the boys meet us at this road or whatever. And it's like if this was a TV movie, even though it seems like there's not much to it, it would be an interesting TV movie because you would have those scenes where they're meeting up or trying to meet up and nobody comes, or other people come and say, I think I might be him, and just, or the trouble that Gordon got into as a teenager because he felt so guilty that he would get into trouble and things like that. So if that was a story and they were producing it, it would be interesting. It would be visually interesting, I think.
Yeah, it would, and I guess it's interesting because I don't know if we'll ever know what happened to them, and I thought it was really heartbreaking that their parents died not knowing. They never even got, even finding the bodies or like confirming their deaths would be some kind of resolution, and they could have a memorial or to spend all those years not knowing and not having that sense of closure.
And the effect it had on the family, I thought that was interesting. It was like there was this division between Gordon pre-abduction and the three boys post-abduction. It's like totally different experience. They grew up with it. It's like no one even needed to say anything, the other three boys. But that's not the same thing as having known the brothers and or let alone feeling guilt. So there was this rupture between Gordon and the other three boys. It's like, I wouldn't have thought of that, but I guess, that's true. Any kind, like the girl, the switched at birth girl, does anyone remember that from 1977 or whatever?
Yes.
Anyway, she was switched at birth, and then there was a court battle because they wanted to have visitation with her when they found out. And she did go and stay with them for a while when she was a teenager. And she said that there was a lot of fighting. There was drama or chaos amongst the kids because of that. It's like, that's just not something I initially would have thought of. But there was. So in that situation, it's Wauchula, Florida. I'm actually on a list for an apartment in Wauchula, Florida. I didn't realize. But there was a hospital there at that time, a county hospital. It's closed now. And there were 2 white babies in the ward and 1 black baby. And the 2 white babies were switched, 2 girls. So it's not like it was, a full ward. And the wrist tag had to have been deliberately switched. There's no way, that it was an accident. And it did come out later. There's a long documentary that I watched bringing it all, up to date, where finally the nurse confessed on her deathbed. So the head of the hospital was friends with the couple that their daughter was born with a heart defect. So they said, we'll switch them. So it's like a crony system where he knew them and, was going to help them out and stuff. It all came out. And the girl, Kimberly, who was switched, the other girl died, the one that they got, and they raised her until she died at 9 because she had a heart defect. Kimberly's in her 40s now. And I don't know if anybody remembers that case, but it was just it was a very sad story for Kimberly too, because her dad was abusive. But anyway, yeah, it's just.
Yeah, I remember reading about that case, and just like, yeah, how difficult it was for her as a kid to know that this had been done to her, and that the family that she thought was her family, that she had a whole other family out there, which I know happens with adopted children and other situations where children may be raised by someone other than their original families, but that it can be sometimes hard to conceptualize, like, well, who's your quote unquote real family, or something like that. And I do remember reading about that case, and especially in a situation like that where it was not just an adoption, but it was essentially a kidnapping. I mean, deliberately taking of a child. That everything you've ever known has been a result of this that happened. And I think maybe that was why in the Lost Brothers, I kind of stuck on the men who thought they might have been the boys, who had some kind of memory of being taken. And I don't think Jack L. Hay actually went into, well, like, what was the reality of those men's stories, because they weren't those boys, so it's not really relevant to this story, but I was kind of wondering, well, what was the reality of the story? If they were not these boys, were they other missing, kidnapped, otherwise separated from families of origin, or adopted, because at that time adoption was sometimes not formalized or not out in the open.
Done underhandedly or informally. And the mother, Regina Twigg, it's interesting because she was from Ohio before that, and her family, she had a large family. And her father was an alcoholic, beat on her mother. They had kids, like 4 or 5 kids. And one day he decided, I don't want to be married anymore. So he put the mother in a mental institution, and he put them in an orphanage. So when they got out, when they grew up, got to be 18, they got out, and then they got their mother out of the mental hospital because she wasn't mental. So there was a lot of trauma there. So it's interesting that another trauma played out in Regina's life, with the switch at birth girl. And the funny thing is that she saw her baby when it was born, and then they brought her the other baby, and she said, that's not my baby. And they overrode her. So that was part of this plot or cover up. So I guess she could have screamed louder, or, I don't know, called somebody or put it in the paper or whatever. So Regina, and then Regina ended up getting divorced, the mother. It broke up their family. Ernest Twigg, I think is his name. So broke up the family eventually, and they each got $1 million or maybe more. And the father that had kidnapped her, agreed to have that kidnapping switch done, he was abusive to Kimberly. And I remember watching that live on TV when they were having the court hearing, because the Twiggs wanted visitation with Kimberly, and Kimberly was fighting it, and they said, did your father ever abuse you? She said, oh, no. And then they juxtaposed it with Kimberly today at age 43 or whatever, saying, oh, yeah, he would, hit me and stuff. So she was, just a big difference. And she still estranged from her real mother, Regina, but she said eventually she will, talk to her again. So I guess what I'm getting out of it is like, it's just, these stories are sometimes very simple, but the fallout with the family and everything can be very complicated in ways I wouldn't have thought. But I guess my main hope is for Gordon to be able to know, while he's still alive.
Yeah, that's what I would hope, and that maybe some kind of resolution would bring him some degree of inner peace or something. Because it was certainly heartbreaking that he was a 9-year-old child at the time, but he felt responsible for that.
Yeah, to have that burden. And some people get the story mixed up with another one called The Lost Boys. And those were from Hannibal, Missouri in 1967, I think. 2 were brothers and 1 was from the neighborhood. So they had caves there that kids would go and explore. And the parents said, and again, that's something that wouldn't even be allowed today. It's like, you don't just go in caves. But they did back then. And they would get dirty and everything. So the parents were mad at those 2 boys. They said, do not go into the caves. But they went in towards the caves. So these 3 boys were seen going towards the caves. And they were never seen again. But what's interesting to that, for me, and I listened to the podcast, and that they also had developed a suspect in that case. So what could have happened is they went into because they searched and searched and searched the caves, is that they could have gone in and came out to get ready to go to a youth meeting that night, and they could have been picked up by this youth minister who could have said, I'll give you a ride. The reason that they think that is because he was later convicted of molesting some boys. So again, a suspect is kind of developed years later that could be different from what they thought, because they thought, oh, they're in the caves. They got stuck in the caves. And it is a big cave system. So that would have taken a lot of money and a lot of time, to search the caves, but maybe that's not exactly, what went down. Just like they assumed it was the Mississippi River, could have been, something totally different. So anyway, there are some similarities there, but yeah. And that was just recently, because the podcasts for the Lost Boys have been in the last few years, and they just developed that suspect. So, it's kind of similar, but some differences.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know if they ever did find. I mean, there is the possibility that if they were abducted versus murdered, they could still be alive somewhere. It seems unlikely, but
The Lost Boys?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I can understand why the family held out hope for because reading it, I was like, so much time has passed. What are really the odds that they're alive? But without a body or without proof, how can you, as the parent or the brother or the person who loved the missing children, how can you give up that last bit of hope? Maybe you can't. So
There was a couple of cases where a boy was abducted by a man, and about 5 or 6 years later, they escaped. And that happened when the man had been abducted a younger boy. In one case, he wanted to save that boy. And he literally could have hitchhiked to a town before that, but he didn't. until that other boy came. And then he later died in a motorcycle accident. But anyway, and in another case was more recently, I think it was 2005 in Missouri, where a man abducted a boy, and he took him to where he lived an hour away. And he was with him for like 5 years. And then he went home. So, where they're abducted but not killed. And in that case, the man had threatened to kill him. But eventually, he left him home on his own while he went to work. It was more of a mind control thing, that he didn't try to escape, because of that. So anyway, and there's just different scenarios where the person doesn't feel safe escaping at that time. And, does anyone remember that? That was more recent, the boy in Missouri.
Yeah, I remember that one. And he was the kidnapper, threatened him, and he even though physically he could have escaped, he was afraid. So that absolutely is a phenomenon that happens, that people can be held, kidnapped and held for long periods of time, not being able to escape or being afraid.
Yeah, just being afraid to escape, because he would go to work all day. That boy didn't go to school. He was at home. So, but in reviewing that case, I realized what happened is that the boy was riding his bike and this car came, bumped into him. He kidnapped him, brought him an hour away, molested him, and then tried to strangle him. And the boy literally pleaded for his life and said, "Don't kill me, do whatever you say." So, that's a pretty extreme experience that, so yeah, I can understand that he was, really traumatized by it.
Well, I hate to leave, but I have to feed my cat, so.
Thank you for coming.
What time do they eat? Do they eat at 3?
I'll see you at 4 o'clock.
And I like to eat at a certain time.
Yeah.
Well, if you come a week from today is recommendation group. If you want to.
What?
A week from
Recommendations?
today is recommendation group, and that's so next month's book club discussion is going to be the Alice Network,
Yes.
and then the one after that is the Children Act.
Oh, you didn't decide to make it the wife?
I had already announced that it was the
Oh,
Children
okay.
Act, so we're but I think it would be, the wife also sounds great, so, maybe a recommendation group, we can do that the next one, so.
Well, I'll read the wife in between now and rec talk, so I can talk about that.
Yeah, I think that would be great, and I think it's interesting. I know that this book maybe didn't necessarily resonate with everybody, but I like that we're kind of mixing it up in terms of book club books. That it's not like it. That we got some nonfiction in there, we got some older books and newer books. So I think it'll be interesting.
This is fiction, the coming up one.
Next Thursday.
Yes, yeah. The next two we have scheduled out is fiction.
So yeah, I watched the movie The Banshees of Iver. It's got a weird name, but I'll talk about that.
Okay, yeah, that sounds interesting. Great. Well, thank y'all for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
It's too bad we didn't get anybody on Google Meets, but maybe next time.
Okay,
I'm gonna
is that
keep-
different from Zoom?
Yeah, it's just it's a different company. They're both free to download.
Did you do Zoom before? or
No,
has
it was Google Meets.
It's always been Google Meets.
And these particular computers are Google computers, so that works a little better for them. But yeah, and I want to keep offering it as an option,
Yeah.
even if we don't get it, just because sometimes somebody uses it, and
It's good to have